It's really important for people to understand that your self-worth is not attached to the quality of your art. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Drawcast, the podcast where I talk about all things digital drawing and my personal experiences with it, and hopefully teach you something about it along the way. If you've been watching my previous episodes, then you know that this is part 3, the final episode of the 3-part series on character design and designing someone else's idea. The character I've been working on for this little mini-series is a mermaid character. She's come a long way from when we first started. Again, just in case any of you haven't listened to the previous 2 parts of this mini-series, I want to give attention to the main people who I learned character creation from, and they are Keenan Lafferty and Draw with Jazza. Go check out their YouTube channels. They have some really cool stuff and very helpful info on art and drawing. It's fantastic stuff, and I highly recommend them, so go watch them. Like right now. But back to the main point, the final stage of design, the fully rendered and realized character. This is what we've been building up to, the finished piece. Hopefully, by this point, you've gone through at least 1 or 2 iterations of the second phase of design, which is refining the design. So you should have a solid idea of what the final character should look like. Before you start drawing, I recommend grabbing some of your previous drawings and including them on your canvas to serve as a direct reference. It will help you to stay on model when you're drawing. So I grabbed one of the mermaids from round 2 to act as my own reference. It's also a good idea to have a pose reference, because the thing about the final design is that you don't want your character to be standing completely straight in a 3/4 turn. Before, when we were designing the character, it was easier, faster, and made more sense to have the character in the same pose over and over again, that static standing pose. It allowed for an easier comparison of the different features that we were drawing. However, there's no personality or life to the character in those poses. A static pose doesn't tell you much about how the character behaves or what their personality is. So this final image should have some sort of personality given to the character. This can be accomplished by posing your character and giving them facial expression. Are they confident, sassy, shy, aggressive, arrogant, stoic, morose? How do you imagine your character carrying themselves? For example, a character who is shy and timid would stand a lot differently than someone who is confident and boastful. You can probably picture that in your head, the way somebody who is really shy would stand versus somebody who is extremely confident in themselves. When coming up with a pose for your own character, consider their personality and how you imagine they would act and behave. Then take that idea and think about how a person like that might be posed to convey that idea, that personality. Once that's all figured out, start looking online for people or characters that are in that pose. This will serve as a reference and can save you time during the initial sketch. So if you have a character standing hands on their hips in a wide stance, you can go online and look that pose up and see how it looks and kind of mimic that in your drawing. If you aren't entirely sure what personality your character should have, don't worry. Your pose doesn't need to be anything bombastic or super exaggerated. Like my mermaid here. I didn't have a full idea of what her personality was supposed to be. So I drew her in a more relaxed pose. She's looking off to the side in a sort of wistful manner, gentle smile on her face. That alone already breathes so much more life into her character than just the blank expression from before. And I didn't have to do any crazy perspective angles to pull that off, and neither do you. Going simple is okay, and sometimes it can be extremely effective, depending on what you're going for. Just make sure, whatever pose you decide on, to refer back to your design reference that I mentioned earlier. You don't want to accidentally go super far off model in your attempt to pose this character and have it end up looking completely different than you intended. Once the pose is figured out and you have your character sketch done, go ahead and move into line and color. Just a reminder that this is not a tutorial on how to do lining. I've already talked about that in previous episodes, along with my method for coloring and shading, so I'm not going to talk about that here. I will, however, discuss the terrible mistake I made while designing this mermaid. I mentioned this little conundrum in the last episode. When I was going through the second stage of design, that is, refining the design, I didn't completely solidify the colors. I figured out the general pattern of the scales, but I used only red when figuring that out, and that didn't translate very well on the final design. I ended up recoloring the entire character 3 times. The first version, you will see, looks more similar to previous designs I made with just kind of that red hue throughout, just at different tonal levels. There were 2 problems with this. The first was that the colors were just wrong. The reds looked more pink and peach colored. She didn't look very fiery. The second problem was that there was no texture to the color. She looked too smooth. It looked more like eel skin rather than fish scales. So I ended up scrapping those colors, and I talked with my friend who I was making this mermaid for and discussed a more solid plan for the color scheme. We found some references online of color palettes I could use, and I messed around with different brushes to get a more scaly texture, and I tried again. And to my credit, it was closer to what my friend was looking for, but the mermaid also looked like she was covered in nacho cheese. There was way too much yellow and orange on this mermaid. She looked like a pepperoni pizza. It was honestly kind of funny. This is where I made my second mistake. While I was coloring her, I could see that it wasn't working. Something was off about it, something I just couldn't figure out. And instead of starting fresh with new colors like I should have done, I just opted to power through and try to make it work. This was a mistake. In hindsight, I can see this clearly, but in the moment, I was thinking that I could make it work. I just needed to edit it a bit more. That the reason it wasn't looking right was because I was being lazy and not trying hard enough and blah, blah, blah. Not only were those thoughts just not true, I had been working for a few hours trying to get the colors to look right, but they were only making everything worse. My self-doubt was affecting my mood, which was affecting my drawing, which then made me even more upset, and it was just an endless cycle. Sometimes the drawing you're working on, for whatever reason, just isn't working. You try for so long to just make it look good, and you just know that you can get it to work if only you were a better artist, or you weren't so lazy, or whatever excuse. Stop. Take a deep breath. You are doing just fine. Step back for a little bit, take a day, and just don't even look at the drawing. Let your mind calm down and come back with fresh eyes. When you do come back, try starting fresh with whatever it is that's giving you so much trouble. Let's say the composition doesn't look right, the placement of objects, it's not very pleasing. Step back, clear your mind, come back, erase it, start again, maybe from a new perspective. Or your line work, for some reason, the style isn't suiting it right, and you try so hard to just get the perfect line width, and it's not working. Step back, come back, erase it, start fresh with something new. I came back after about a day and a half and completely redid the colors for the third time. I also found a different brush that I felt worked better for the scales. The colors from my second try were too yellowy orange, so this time I tried a scarlet red base instead. So the mermaid would be primarily red with some orange patches and little to almost no yellow. It looked so much better. She looks a lot more like fire and less like cheese. It's really important for people to understand that your self-worth is not attached to the quality of your art. It's something I struggle with a lot, that if I don't like the way a picture is turning out, I will feel really bad about myself. Like, myself as a person, my worth has dropped because I wasn't able to make this picture look the way I wanted it to. It's such a hard thing to break away from, that mindset that your worth is tied to the quality of your art. Please, if you find yourself feeling that way, I encourage you to take a break, step away from your art for a bit, and center yourself. Your worth is not limited to the quality of your art. You are worth more than any art could ever hope to be. I'm not an expert on mental health. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a therapist. I do understand what it feels like to tie your self-worth with your artwork and how people respond to it. And I can tell you that that is not healthy. It's not good for you. Art should be something that you enjoy to do. It should be something that brings the best out of you, that makes you happy and allows you to express yourself. And if you're not getting that, if you're feeling upset from it, stop for a little bit. It's okay to take a break and calm down for a little. Sometimes that's all you need. This kind of turned into a little motivational speech, but I felt like it needed to be said. I hear a lot that, anybody can do art, you just gotta try and get better, and don't get down on yourself for that. But I don't hear a lot of people talking about the self-worth that people feel through their art, that they attach their identity to, and how that can just get ripped asunder if people say the wrong thing about your art. But yeah, you're doing just fine. But yeah, once I stepped away and came back and redid those colors, I was feeling so much better, and the overall outcome I got was better than what it was before, and I really liked how this mermaid turned out. Me personally, I don't usually do those warm, bright red colors, so it was really interesting to kind of step out of my comfort zone in that respect, because this design was ultimately for somebody else, and this is what they wanted. And I ended up really enjoying myself in the end with how it turned out. I honestly think with her little gills and the way she looks off to the side, she looks super cute. But yeah, that should be about it for this episode. Gonna go ahead and wrap it up, and as always, thank you for listening. And don't forget to look back at your model reference. Okay,